What's up, true believers? James Hancock here, back to review Deadpool 2, the sequel to the runaway smash surprise success of 2016, a movie that wildly performed beyond anyone's expectations. For those of you who hate spoilers, I'll be offering some general impressions initially, but I'll be getting into some pretty heavy spoilers once I give the appropriate warning. But I will say up front, I absolutely loved and adored Deadpool 2, but sadly I did not like it as much as Deadpool 1. I just want to get that out of the way right from the outset. There are many things to enjoy in Deadpool 2, but there was something so out of left field, so insane, so bonkers, so refreshingly R-rated about the first one. I knew well in advance that this movie was going to have a very tough act to follow. Director Tim Miller absolutely gave us champagne for the price of beer with the first movie, and sadly Tim Miller, for reasons that I still don't fully understand, parted ways with Deadpool 2, and they brought in director David Leitch, I believe I'm saying his name correctly. David Leitch is no slouch in the action department. He's been involved in the stunt department for like 80 movies. He also directed the movie Atomic Blonde. He was one of the co-directors on the first John Wick movie. So he definitely knows how to stage a fight and a shootout, etc. But that slick, nimble, dark comedy that Tim Miller handled so expertly in the first movie, sadly is just a little bit lacking in this particular film. But if you're excited to see Deadpool 2, not to worry, you're going to have an absolute blast. This is a movie that for people my age, I'm 41, takes me all the way back to like age 14, 15. I was basically reading every single comic book on the rack that had an X in front of it. I hadn't necessarily developed any critical faculties yet, and as far as I was concerned, every comic book was a good comic book and worth reading. And while I wasn't aware of what was being done to me at the time, Chris Claremont had been kind of unceremoniously shoved out of the X-Men universe in spite of the fact that he was the one who over 15 years made X-Men a household word. And then the new corporate policy at Marvel was just shove as much X-Men down our throats as humanly possible. So all at the same time, we suddenly had X-Men, Uncanny X-Men, a reboot of X-Factor, and X-Force, which at the time had a lot of the characters that you will see in Deadpool 2. In the early 90s, we suddenly got inundated with a lot of characters who had a lot of knives, a lot of guns, a lot of pouches, a lot of ammunition. Guys like Rob Liefeld were making these characters very popular. So both in the pages of Marvel and in Image, we all of a sudden were just being inundated by all these mercenary style characters. And Deadpool and Cable were definitely two of the most popular characters of that ilk. So to see Josh Brolin and Ryan Reynolds on the screen at the same time, it was definitely an incredibly intense flashback to my misspent youth. But moving forward, I'd be totally happy if Fox abandoned any and all efforts with all their other X-Men properties that aren't involved with Deadpool. I think the perfect way for Fox to distinguish themselves is by doing these crazy, irreverent, R-rated movies. I know a lot of things on a corporate level are still very much up in the air because a couple months ago, Marvel successfully bought all this intellectual property from Fox, including a lot of these Marvel characters like Deadpool and the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. But now there's this crazy thing going on where Comcast is trying to outbid Disney. It'll probably take a couple years before we know for certain who's going to own this giant library of characters. But over the last couple of years, Fox has proven that when it comes to R-rated superhero movies, of which there are precious few, they actually are kind of the best in the business. Logan and Deadpool were absolutely fucking incredible, and nobody over at Disney is doing anything like that. And at my age, I'm not really interested in watching superhero shows or superhero movies anymore about teenagers popping their zits and having problems at high school. I've read 100 million stories featuring those kind of scenarios, and they're all well and good, but I much prefer to see mature takes on superhero characters, movies that treat the audience as if we're not children, where we don't need the entire world child-proof for us, where they're not worried about offending us. I mean, apart from outright hardcore sex, this movie has just about everything we would want when it comes to graphic content. So even if a lot of the jokes fell flat this time around, and plenty of the jokes fall flat, and even if the movie completely, utterly bungles one of the surprise villains that I will not spoil until I get to my spoiler section, the fact remains I was basically laughing or smiling or just cracking up and just having a good time pretty much from start to finish, which as far as I'm concerned makes it better than 99% of the other movies out there. So definitely go see Deadpool 2. If I rated the first one at about a 9 out of 10, I'd probably rate this one like a 7.5 or an 8 out of 10. It just falls slightly shy of the mark of the first movie. In any case, I think I've tap danced around spoiling anything long enough, so this is my last spoiler warning. I need to talk about some specifics. So what I really appreciated about Deadpool 1 was that it proved just how rabid audiences are for really hardcore takes on superheroes. I'm wearing a Fritz the Cat t-shirt, and for people who don't know, Fritz the Cat, which came out like 70 or 71, was an independent film. It was X-rated, and still to this day, it's the most successful independent animated film ever released. It was just a runaway smash success, much like Deadpool. And most of the things that worked in the first one and most of the characters from the first one are back. The problem is that some of the scenes feel a little bit stale or a little bit familiar, and perhaps it's unfair, but the reality is this movie's standing on the shoulders of a beloved movie. And I'd say in the first third of the movie has the majority of the weak scenes where you hear a joke, you're expecting some sort of punchline, and the scene just kind of stalls for a second, and then it continues. And I was starting to get a little bit worried when I saw that some of the action scenes didn't necessarily have the punch of Atomic Blonde and John Wick, two of the best action movies of the last couple of years. That kind of surprised me when the action didn't feel as slick as I was expecting. But things kick into high gear with the arrival of Cable. And Josh Brolin, he's just having an insane year. I mean, he already played Thanos a couple weeks ago. Everybody's ranting and raving about how he's their favorite Marvel character, how they want to have sex with him, etc. and so forth. They even make a reference to him being Thanos in this movie. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely love Thanos. I think Thanos might be my favorite character in the MCU. So it's just insane that here we are a couple weeks later seeing Josh Brolin play yet another iconic Marvel character. As an absolute junkie for anything and everything related to the Summers bloodline in X-Men, I was a little disappointed to see just how thin they were on the details. But the gist of his mission is that he's come back in time because he wants to kill this kid who's going to become the most horrible supervillain of his time, murder Cable's family, etc. The kid is played by Julian Dennison, who I thought was absolutely extraordinary in the Taika Waititi film Hunt for the Wilderpeople. If you like Thor Ragnarok, Taika Waititi, he's the director who made that. His earlier movie which basically got him the gig was Hunt for the Wilderpeople, and this kid is just funny as hell in that movie, and it's got more heart than you can imagine. But sadly, the kid's a little bit annoying in this. I mean, occasionally he's funny, but more often than not, he's trying a little bit too hard. And I feel like some of his lines and some of his scenes might have been better left on the cutting room floor. But what we learn is that there's this orphanage out there that this kid came from, and this orphanage is basically abusing / molesting all these young mutant children that are growing up there. Domino, who's one of the main characters in this movie as well, she came from that orphanage. And we learn that basically if this kid Russell goes back and murders everybody there, that's what sets him on the path to the dark side to becoming a supervillain. And he actually teams up with the fucking Juggernaut to make that happen. So initially Deadpool has to assemble X-Force to try to stop Cable from murdering the kid. But once Deadpool learns what's going to happen, he basically teams up with Cable as well because he knows that Juggernaut and the kid must be stopped, but Deadpool does want to try and redeem the kid one last time to see if he can actually place him on a different path. But over and over again, I was just blown away by how much better this movie was at handling the X-Men properties than the actual flagship X-Men movies. X-Men Apocalypse really let me down on a lot of fronts, but we get this great, beautiful cameo of all those characters in the mansion at one point when Deadpool's screaming at Colossus like, how come you're the only guy who's ever here? And we see through a doorway all the X-Men kind of hanging out. They very quickly close the door. Negasonic Teenage Warhead is back along with her girlfriend Yukio. And to my knowledge, I think this is the first big lesbian relationship in superhero movies. But when Deadpool struggles to operate within the rigid rules of the X-Men playbook, he assembles his own team, which we've seen in the trailer many times, like Shatterstar, who even as a kid I thought was a total douchebag. He comes from the Mojo world, the world that has obviously Mojo and Longshot and a bunch of other characters, but I've never been a big fan of Shatterstar. Luckily, he gets killed very quickly in this. We get the Vanisher, played in a very small cameo by Brad Pitt. We get Zeitgeist and we get Bedlam. We get an everyday, ordinary guy, Peter. But much to my surprise, the first big X-Force mission ends in total disaster. There's a little bit of a breeze on the day that they're all going to try to parachute in and save this kid from Cable. And as a result of this little breeze, basically everybody but Domino and Deadpool gets killed. The real showstopper during these scenes is Domino. And she's played by an actress, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but Zazie Beetz is what I'm seeing on IMDb. But her power is very hard to see visually, but she has the power of luck. And so if somebody points a gun to her head point blank and they pull the trigger, it's going to come up empty. If a car is about to run her over, chances are another car is going to sideswipe it. Basically everything she does, things just tend to work out. But she's also just cool as shit, looks awesome on screen. She's definitely a very welcome addition to the X-Men cinematic universe. And if Fox is smart, they'll continue to use her again and again. There's one cameo that's absolutely hysterical that comes directly from my childhood, but in all the comics that I read in the late 70s and early 80s, the Juggernaut's wingman in all of his endeavors was always Black Tom Cassidy. And Black Tom Cassidy was Irish, and he and the Banshee were always going head to head. But there's this great line at one point when he and Deadpool are fighting, and Deadpool's like, what's your power? Cultural appropriation? But when Cable ends up killing Black Tom, he's like, you kill Black Tom, you racist! But that's one of the most refreshing things about this movie is how hysterically it tackles a lot of issues involving identity politics. Obviously, that topic is a lightning rod of controversy, irrespective of one's personal politics. But no matter what people's personal politics might be, I think they'll be deliriously entertained by the way this movie handles race and sexuality, identity, all of the above. So So the big final battle at the end of the movie is a little disappointing, mostly because it's very hard to take Russell and Juggernaut seriously as villains. Juggernaut just looks ridiculous, he sounds ridiculous, the way he moves is ridiculous. Juggernaut's one of my all-time favorite villains from my childhood. I absolutely loved and adored every time he appeared in the comics. Whether he was fighting Colossus in a drunken brawl in a bar, he's always been cool, and I feel like X3 Last Stand totally screwed him up, and this movie totally screwed him up. For whatever reason, Fox just can't get Juggernaut right. But there is one really cool detail in this battle where Russell uses his flame attacks and burns Deadpool, and as a result of the way his costume gets burned, we get a nice cameo of his gray and black outfit from the Rick Remender run on Uncanny X-Force. If you're a comic book fan, you already know what I'm talking about, but at one point, Rick Remender had this incredible run on X-Force. It was led by Wolverine, and basically all the sociopaths in the X-Men world. And during that time, Deadpool wore this totally badass black and gray outfit, so we get to see a little taste of that. But best of all, Cable makes a very important decision during this battle. He has basically two uses of his time sliding technology, one to come back in time and one to get back home once his work is done. But when Deadpool dies in the battle, Cable decides to use his last charge on his device to save Deadpool's life, meaning that Cable's going to stick around and be a permanent member of X-Force. And basically at the end of the movie, when we see all these characters walking toward us, it's basically a hybrid of some members of X-Men as well as the surviving members of X-Force, Domino, Cable, and Deadpool. And I would give my right arm to have that Dark Phoenix movie later this fall just not get released and just get an X-Force movie as fast as humanly possible. And there's a great bit of comedy where Negasonic, Teenage Warhead, and Yukio, they managed to fix this little time-sliding device and they give it to Deadpool, and as a result, Deadpool is able to travel back in time and save his girlfriend from being killed at the beginning of the movie. He goes back in time and saves Peter, but more importantly, he goes back to X-Men Origins Wolverine and kills that ridiculous early version of Deadpool that we got long before the actual Deadpool movie. And then even better, he goes back in time and he kills Ryan Reynolds before he accepts the offer to play Green Lantern. He's like, I'm about to hit the big time, and Deadpool just blows him away. Deadpool would not be Deadpool without massive pop cultural references in addition to major fourth wall breaks. Now it's just one of many fantastic fourth wall breaks scattered throughout. For James Bond fans, there's this killer James Bond style opening credit sequence, but instead of beautiful girls, it's just Deadpool. And if you've ever dreamed of seeing Deadpool naked from the waist down, this movie also has a nice little treat where after Juggernaut grabs Deadpool and completely rips him in half, Deadpool slowly but surely is growing back his legs and his dong, and when Cable comes to ask for his help, Deadpool does one of those Basic Instinct style leg crossing scenes, easily the funniest joke in the movie. So while I did not enjoy this movie as much as Deadpool, I still want it to be a runaway success. Whether or not it'll be a success to the degree that the first one was, I'm a little bit doubtful just because Deadpool 1 was so fresh and so original. We just hadn't really seen anything like it before. It was one of those movies that people were going back 3 or 4 times and bringing friends and family members along just to say, hey, you've got to see this fucking movie. It's incredible. I don't know if this movie will have the same kind of legs like that. That said, I desperately want the movie to make all the money in the world because I want more R-rated superhero movies. As you can see behind me, I've got some of my comic book collection on display, and as much as I love your normal family-friendly PG-13 superhero movies, there's so much great R-rated material out there, or just R-rated takes on familiar characters, and I'm just worried that the first time one of these R-rated superhero movies underperforms, that it might kill the momentum on that front. The big question is whether or not Marvel would ever be able to find room in their slate for some R-rated superhero movies, because Marvel Comics at one point did this thing called the Max line, where with Bruce Banner and Luke Cage and the Mighty Thor, they did these insanely graphic, hardcore comics that I absolutely loved. But I think I've rambled enough at this point. It's time to bring this video in for a safe landing. If you've seen the movie, let me know what you think in the comments below, or just give me a shout on Twitter at Colbrex. If you enjoyed my little reaction review, please consider subscribing to my channel. I would greatly appreciate it. I mostly review TV shows here just because there's so much great TV coming out, but I definitely try and review as many movies as humanly possible, and I'll be back to review Solo, a Star Wars story, next week. But thanks so much for watching my video. I really appreciate it, and as always, onwards and upwards.